Well, grace to you and peace be multiplied through Jesus Christ our Lord. It's a delight to be with you here in Ukraine. And those of you who are serving here, you are heroes. You may not feel that way. I know that we should all be on the front lines of God's kingdom, but it does feel like some places are a bit more front lines-ish than others. And I want to thank you for your service. It's a delight for our family to be here, my wife and our 4 children. We have Caitlin, who is 7, Hudson, who's 5, Megan, 3, and Brittany, 1. And 1 on the way, Lord willing, next April. Compassion fatigue. What is that? And what does my spleen have to do with such a thing? When David first asked me to speak on this subject, I said to my wife Heather, I said, I don't know that I have a clear concept of what this is, other than with 4 children from 20 months up to 7 years, there are times that by 8 o'clock in the morning, I feel compassion fatigue, whatever that is. I'm just bone dry. I don't have any more to give. It's just time to pull out the rod and do some spanking, it feels like. Of course, in a professional, missional sense, the sort of fatigue that we're talking about is not just being weary of parenting. And so this morning I'd like us to consider 4 aspects of this issue. First of all, to consider compassion fatigue defined. We probably have a reasonable idea of what compassion is. We probably have first-hand experience with fatigue. But what do these 2 words together mean? And does it have any bearing on my life? Is compassion fatigue, or CF, a real thing, or should we categorize it with the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot? Is CF the same as having a bad day or getting burned out? In my line of work, I work construction for a River Brethren fellow. It's just a small crew of us. There are 4 other guys besides me, and they are all River Brethren, and I've really enjoyed working with them. I have a tremendous boss. And I've worked with that crew. I worked on that crew for 5.5 years now. And we do pole barns and house roofs and barn roofs and things like that. Just several weeks ago, we were doing several different jobs, and I went from one job to another to a pole garage that we had built. Needed some things finished up on it. I was pounding in concrete pins. I was putting on some metal trim corners on the roof, metal ridge, and one of my coworkers was with me, and he was doing some other things as well. As the day progressed, I did not feel well. And I thought, well, this will pass. I don't know what's going on, but I'm sure I'll be fine. Just got to power through this, got to work through it. And I had some nausea, and I thought about calling Heather and asking her to pray for me, but I didn't want to scare her. And I had thoughts of, am I going to make it through this? That's kind of weird. I'm a healthy person. I'm in good shape. And my colleague thankfully decided to pack up a half hour early, and I was right behind him. I was packing up too, and I was out of there. It was on a Wednesday, and I got home that late afternoon and knew I wasn't going to make it to prayer meeting the way I was feeling. I thought I'll take a hot shower and that'll help things. Well, I was laying around the recliner. The children were being exceptionally unruly, and I had no energy to deal with it. I just could not function. I was kaput. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if I was going to live or die. I was just feeling more, especially after the shower, I felt more and more miserable. I texted one of our ministers. I said, please request prayer for me in prayer meeting tonight. And I was able to do a little bit of looking around online and come to realize that possibly I was experiencing heat fatigue or exhaustion. or maybe even heat stroke. Well, I've heard of those things, but in all my years, I'm 44 years old, I feel like I can do pretty well with extremes. I work outside pretty much all the time. That's our work is outside. And so in the winter, in the summer, in the fall and spring, it's really beautiful, of course. I've done it all. And I couldn't believe that the heat was getting the best of me. And then I read that the worst thing you do is take a hot shower. That just makes it, you need to cool your core body temperature down as fast as possible. And here I am in the recliner thinking that I'm going to go see Jesus right away. And I did. I was praying, and I asked Heather and the children to gather around and pray for me. They didn't know how serious it was, but I just felt like I was going to black out at any moment. And so once I realized what was going on, I started sticking my head under cold running water. That helped. But it was a miserable night, and I had some things in my van that needed to go to the next job, so I felt like I had to go the next morning, but I went. My head was still foggy, and I said to my coworkers, I said, I'm here on probation. I don't know if I can make it the whole day. We were just starting a house roof at that point, 12 pitch. And so anyway, all that to say that, I had all of the problems, but I didn't recognize what the symptoms were. And I really believe that can happen to us. That can happen to us in various ways in life. I'm going to suggest to you that the same is possible for compassion fatigue. I'm not saying everybody has it, but we can experience it, I believe, and not realize what is happening to us because we don't have categories for it. I did not have categories for heat stroke or heat exhaustion. I'd heard about it. I thought, well, those poor people, that aren't as strong constitutionally, they experience that thing, not me. Hello? It's a wake up. So, what can we learn about the definition of compassion fatigue? In the bit of research that I did, it is a real issue. It's a real problem. It's not classified with the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot. It really can happen to people. One of the questions is, how are compassion fatigue and burnout alike or different? And there are some similarities, there are differences, and depending on where you go, there are differences of opinion on what is the same and what is different. I'd like to share just a few of what you could think about as likely differences and similarities. Burnout tends to be related to work. So you're at your job and you've just been putting in long hours, and maybe it's year after year, and then you just get to this point where I'm burned out. I feel like I'm done. I want to sell the business. I want to go do something else. Compassion fatigue has more to do with caring for people. And so these are nurses and doctors and missionaries, people who are caring, and after a while the caring well just gets dry. Could be policemen, could be soldiers. Anybody that's just caring quite a bit. And another differentiation would be that burnout would be caused by stress or overwork, whereas compassion fatigue can be caused by what's called first or second trauma. And that's the idea that you can talk to somebody who has been traumatized and experience in your body the trauma yourself. Not to that extent maybe, but you can experience second degree trauma in your body and be traumatized. So for people who are constantly interacting with those who have been traumatized, and that can be medically or that can be missionally, it's good to be aware that it can affect you. Another difference between burnout and compassion fatigue is that burnout tends to have a little slower onset, generally, and CF tends to be quicker. In some cases, if it's a major trauma, like a first degree experience, you can experience CF almost right away, where you just kind of shut down and cannot connect or engage emotionally. Burnout has a potentially longer recovery, and CF, if you are quick to address it, can have a quicker recovery. So that's encouraging. Another difference is that when you're burned out, you're feeling under pressure, but when you're facing compassion fatigue, you tend to feel out of control. So let's say that you're distributing food to those who are near the front lines, and you're seeing all of the havoc and all of the chaos, and I'm sure it's easy to say to yourself, what can I do? I'm giving a box of food when complete infrastructure is virtually gone. It just feels like so little in the midst of so much. And what if it comes back and there's even more devastation? It's just, I have no control. What am I doing? With burnout, there tends to be a lack of motivation. With compassion fatigue, you can have PTSD symptoms. And those symptoms can be things like flashbacks. They can be physical sensations of pain or nausea or sweating, nightmares. We often think of PTSD as related to men who have served in the military. But anything that's very traumatic or that your body reads as traumatic. And we're all wired differently, okay? Some people can handle extreme heat. Some people, I think, can handle fairly extreme trauma. For my wife and me, we do not do well with the sight of blood. So we're glad for those EMTs that are excited to get out there and run the ambulances and things like that. But that's not our constitution, okay? So just being aware that we are all susceptible in different ways. Just because brother so-and-so is really strong and is not affected by compassion fatigue doesn't mean that the other brother so-and-so is going to be the very same way. And so, especially as mission leaders, this is good for you to consider as you think about your staff. Differences between burnout and CF. Burnout reduces the performance. Compassion fatigue reduces empathy. It's just hard to really care about people. We've shut down emotionally. In burnout, you tend to have detachment from work. With compassion fatigue, you tend to have withdrawal from people. And there can be overlap between burnout and compassion fatigue. There are some similarities as well. With burnout and compassion fatigue, there's irritability. As a parent, I feel like, I'm dealing with burnout and compassion fatigue all at once. With burnout, you tend to have a sense of cynicism, about life and about how things would go. With compassion fatigue, you may experience feelings anyway. As good Anabaptists, will stuff any violence, but we might feel violent toward our loved ones, or we may just neglect them because we cannot connect. We've shut down emotionally, and so we have nothing to give. So there are some similarities. There are a number of differences between burnout and compassion fatigue. I believe it's often difficult to differentiate between these two when we think about missionary life. And this is somewhat speculative on my part. I've never been a missionary. I've been a missionary kid, and that's its own ball of wax. But why do you think that would be? That it'd be hard to differentiate between burnout and compassion fatigue? And I'm soliciting your input here. In the missionary sphere, we're not talking about doctors and nurses or soldiers or policemen or ambulance drivers. We're talking about missionaries. I have a theory about why it's hard to differentiate between these two, but what do you think? And this might be a whole new thought for you, so I understand if this is new. To caregiving.
In my mind, these two are together.
Yes, that's my theory, is that burnout being related to work and compassion fatigue being related to caring for people. As a missionary, where does your work stop and your caring begin, and is there a differentiation between those two? They all seem wrapped up together in many ways. You don't just close the door at 5 o'clock and say goodbye to the office. The office goes with you because you're accessible and you need to be, and you're on call. And so I think that's why we can recognize that while there are differences, there are similarities. It's just good to be aware of the various things related to burnout and compassion fatigue. I don't think you need to know all the nuances. I just want you to be aware that there are symptoms. There are bad symptoms. Okay? And if you're finding yourself on the recliner barely able to function, it might be one of these two columns, or it might be both of them put together. One expert who was speaking about how compassion fatigue can develop and show itself said, "We have not been directly exposed to the trauma scene, but we hear the story told with such intensity, or we hear similar stories so often, or we have the gift and curse of extreme empathy, and we suffer. We feel the feelings of our people, we experience their fears, we dream their dreams. Eventually we lose a certain spark of optimism, humor, and hope. We tire. We aren't sick, but we aren't ourselves." And that's my desire for you. I want you to have that optimism, that hope, that humor that can buoy you up in the realities of life and to carry you through the times of difficulty. Compassion fatigue is also called vicarious traumatization or secondary traumatization. So we've considered the existence of CF and a definition for it or an understanding of it. But how do we notice it in ourselves? Or how do we detect it in someone else? I had previously heard about heat stroke and heat exhaustion, but I had never experienced it, and I really didn't know what to look for. And so I think it's valuable for us to go to that second angle, compassion fatigue detected. We can define it, but how do we see it in ourselves, observe it in others? There's a quote that I appreciate. Some lady, Dr. Naomi Rachel Riemann, said, the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. And so I'm just encouraging you to think about what is it that you are facing in this environment. Several weeks ago, in preparing for this talk, I called a mission leader in northwestern Ontario. Norm Miller is the director or CEO of Northern Youth Ministries. How many of you are familiar with NYM? Some of you would be. It's a ministry very much like MIM as far as the number of staff. Their pressure points would be related to the Indian people, the First Nations people, the reservations across the Canadian North. And if you're familiar with the reservation life, it's a very hopeless life. It's a dead end. There is just a tremendous abuse, tremendous alcoholism, fragmentation of families. To help young people see a future feels impossible. And that is the environment that I grew up in as an MK. My parents were missionaries in northwestern Ontario from the time I was 3 till I was 11, or 4 till I was 11. It was a great experience, loved it. But as an adult, I can evaluate where my friends ended up. I went to school with those First Nations children, and some of them are actually dead now because of the violence and the hopelessness of the reservation life. But as I was talking to Brother Norm, he was saying to me that he said he believes that compassion fatigue is a huge issue, but it's not on the radar of most mission agencies today. And I said to him, well, why is that? If it's such a big problem or a potential problem, why aren't agencies taking a closer look? And I don't know if it's fair or not, but his take was that agency focus is recruitment. You got to have enough staff, got to have enough people, and to even put out there the possibility, the potential of something like compassion fatigue, well, count me out. I'm not going to face that. I don't know what all it is. It'd be fair, of course, to talk with various mission leaders. Maybe they don't have categories for it. Maybe it isn't on their radar. I wouldn't say they're purposely sweeping it under the rug. But Norm's take was we really need to encourage our recruits to think about the fact that they're going on a battlefield. You know that, obviously. This is the easiest place to talk about that. But there are many mission fields where it's kind of nice to go, as far as economically, as far as politically. And it almost feels like, a vacation in the Caribbean if we get to go to Bermuda or something. But the reality is, wherever the kingdom work is taking place, it's a war zone. It's a battle. It's not just in Ukraine, but it's around the world that we are to be engaged in this spiritual warfare. And so when I asked Norm what he looks for in his staff to detect compassion fatigue, here are several things he gave me. He said, really, you need to think about some of the things that aren't there. What is absent? One of the things is the support of the team. In other words, is the team working well together? Or is there fragmentation? Is there a lack of supporting one another? That's a huge thing. That can really drag staff down. So, and it could be because they're facing this emotional shutdown that they aren't able to coalesce as a team. Consider an absence of interaction with the group. Is there a person who is physically present, but verbally they don't engage? They don't interact with their comrades and their colleagues. And then presence with people. Is there someone who's isolating themselves? They're not even with the group. I mean, they're going off to their room and they're just on their phone as much as possible. They're isolating themselves. And then is there an absence of hope? Do you sense growing feelings of cynicism, hopelessness? Well, we'll never make a difference, and what I'm doing doesn't count, and it really doesn't matter anyway, and why are we here, and what's the point? Be aware of those things in yourself, in others, your colleagues. Norm also encouraged to look for bottled up emotions. Obviously, it can be hard to tell that, but if you get to know your brother or sister well enough, you can probably detect if they're holding some things in that aren't healthy. An impulse to rescue anyone in need, and these aren't just from Norm, but these are other things that I have gleaned here and there. Some people just move into this thing where I need to rescue everybody. This can be a sign of CF. Sadness, apathy can be a sign. A lack of interest in self-care practices. Just, I'm not taking care of myself anymore. I'm not washing my hair. My clothes don't look well. I don't even really eat very well, maybe. Reoccurring nightmares or flashbacks. That goes back to the PTSD, like the post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that we talked about. Difficulty concentrating or mental tiredness. Now, again, just because you have one or so of these doesn't mean you automatically have CF, but consider the scope. Consider the overall picture. Persistent physical ailments. Being prone toward accidents. It's good for us to consider our motivation. What was it that motivated us to become missionaries in the first place? That's one of the things that Norm said to me. To go back to that original driving thing that brought you to where you are now. And his comment was that missionaries are nice people overall. That's why they're missionaries, right? It's the nice people that go to do missions. But that also means that as nice people, you are susceptible, more likely, to compassion fatigue. And so it's good to be aware of these various symptoms. It's hard for nice people to say no. And there's great pressures. There's the expectations that others have, and there's internal pressures. I'm going to guess that some of you feel some internal pressures from the home front. That you feel like I need to be doing enough so that when the newsletter comes out, it looks like I did enough. Okay, and so it's pressures that you can put on yourself, things that you can think of as expectations from home that may or may not be true. And so I want to encourage you to release those. Okay, to let those go, Obviously, you want to do your best, and you don't want to be lazy, but sometimes we put more pressures on ourselves than we need to. Why would we be reluctant to acknowledge the possibility of compassion fatigue in our lives? And again, I'm soliciting your input if you'd like to offer a thought on this. As I was thinking about this topic, I thought, well, I think I would be sort of reluctant to say, I think I have it. It's almost like saying I have COVID. Why do you think there might be a reluctance to admit?
Maybe shame.
Shame.
You can't be doing what you think others expect of you.
Yes. It goes back to that pressure, isn't it? Where I think that others are expecting things of me, and oftentimes others are expecting things of me, and I just can't do it. I can't. Any other? Thank you, brother, for that.
Especially if you think, I haven't really done that much. And if you say, I'm already weary of this, they're like, you haven't even started yet.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think the idea we preach and teach that God is able, the Holy Spirit is all powerful, and if He's in it, let's go.
Yes.
You know?
Amen.
It almost brings a certain invincibility to us, and that's misguided somehow.
Yes. Thank you, Brother Nathan. We feel like, yes, God will never give me more than I can handle. I think that's one of the urban spiritual legends that we like to hang on to. Which brings us to our third angle. And it's a point that I call compassion fatigue defied. And what I'm saying here is I think one reason why we're reluctant to acknowledge this possibility in our lives is because we don't detect anything like this in our Heavenly Father. God has never had compassion fatigue. Did Jesus ever have compassion fatigue?
When he went away to rest a while.
Okay. I think that's part of where our struggle is. In the Old Testament, God is characterized as being full of compassion. That statement's used 5 times about him. All five are found in the Psalms. And particularly I'll highlight the first and last uses. In Psalm 78:38, but he being full of compassion. And then the 5th usage, Psalm 145:8, the Lord is gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger and great in mercy. It's a beautiful picture of the reality of our God. But it can also feel a bit condemnatory because it's not me. And then we come to Jesus. And he displays the same characteristics as his Father, which we would expect. And so the text that David had given me is in Matthew 9. I'd like to read the surrounding verses just for the context. But in that Matthew 9:35, it says, Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were weary and scattered like sheep, having no shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, The harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. So, when it says that Jesus was moved with compassion, that Greek word there, splanchnisomai, is the pronunciation, if I understand correctly, is a word that's used a number of times throughout the New Testament, all connected either to Jesus or to a story that he told about people who were moved with compassion. And that word seems to go back to the word for spleen. So hence the subtitle, What If My Spleen Gets Lean? Probably what it meant as far as connecting compassion with the spleen is it's the gut. Okay, my understanding is that the Greek people weren't necessarily trying to pinpoint a specific organ of the body, but when you see something awful or difficult or you hear it, it just sort of gets you in the gut. And it makes you want to do something about it. If you have this splanchnisemai. And so we see that Jesus did. He had this. He was moved. He didn't just look on from a distance. He didn't offer some cold, calculating take on what he was seeing. But I do want to encourage you with what I see, that I believe what we see Jesus doing is moving with purposefulness. He wasn't frenzied. He wasn't fried. He wasn't just burned out. But we just see that he goes through life. We don't see him rushing. We don't see him fretting. We don't see him wondering what his Father thinks of him. Somehow he had that equilibrium. And yet he maintained the emotion that could care, that could move him to action. Now it's interesting to notice in our text that while Jesus is moved by what he saw, by the fact that these people had no leader, we don't have any record here that he did something heroic about it in that moment. You notice that? All he does, this doesn't sound like much, but he uses it as a challenge to his disciples to pray. He doesn't tell them, look, you guys really aren't doing enough. You need to lay off on the Doritos and get out there and start helping these people. Okay? No ice cream for you. As long as the needs of the world are like they are, no engaging in anything pleasurable or that makes you happy. You need to get out there and give these people what they need. No, he doesn't say that. He does say, pray. Pray. That's something we can all do. Now, if you look at the bigger context of this passage, you'll notice that if we ignore the chapter division there at chapter 10, he goes on then to give them the power they needed to heal diseases and cast out demons. So he empowered them to carry out what they needed to do to meet, I think, some of this need that was moving Jesus' heart. And in the parallel passage in Mark 6 that Brother David read, you'll notice that, as he said, it's in the context of this tremendous loss of John the Baptist. I'm sure that just hit Jesus very hard. And in the midst of all the comings and goings, it says they didn't even have as much time so as to eat. And so he said, let's go away for a little while. And so they get in this boat, they go across, and boom, there's a whole crowd waiting to be ministered to and cared about. And Jesus did that. He cared about them. He fed them, 5,000 of them. But once that was over, he sent his disciples away in a boat again, and he went away to pray. And so what I see is Jesus, yes, for a moment he's willing to sacrifice himself, and we all need those moments. But there's a difference between a moment and a way of life. And especially in America, maybe not, I don't know how it is here in Ukraine, but in America, it feels like we have pedal to the metal, it's max all the time, and we keep saying to ourselves, well, this is just a season. This is just a season. This is just a season. Well, if the season never ends, it's not a season. It's a way of life. And what I see with Jesus is I see seasons. And he really made sure that his staff, if you will, had seasons. Yeah, we have to meet this immediate food need for today, but now you guys go away. You really need to get away. Go out in the boat. And so I want to encourage you with that. Consider your staff and make sure that they are emotionally cared for and equipped. This splanchnisemai, there's a blog post where the author calls it the sacred spleen of Jesus. So I guess we could try to identify with the sacred spleen of Jesus. So we looked at compassion fatigue, defined, detected, defied. The fourth angle and final one would be compassion fatigue deterred. In other words, how can we keep from having this happen, or how can we come back if we experience this sort of thing in our own lives? A quote that I came across I liked says, "Taking care of myself doesn't mean me first, it means me too." Me too. As missionaries, I'm sure there's oftentimes when you feel a little guilty because there's so many people that need to be taken care of. Should I really take time to care for myself? And taking care of yourself doesn't mean you don't care about everybody else. But it means that you include yourself in with the everybody else. Because you also are a person and you matter. There's a book that I read a summary for, short form summary, called Trauma Stewardship. And I like this lady's concept here. She talked about trauma stewardship as tending to your own needs and emotions so that you can fully and compassionately help others who are suffering. Bessel van der Kolk, who defines trauma in The Body Keeps the Score, he defines it as your emotional, neurological, and physiological response to distressing or disturbing event. This lady, though, Laura Lipsky, explains her reasoning behind the term stewardship, which is broadly defined as the responsible caretaking of something entrusted to you. For trauma workers, people like social workers, I'd say missionaries in Ukraine, who regularly support people who have trauma, this means being responsible to both others and themselves. I'm encouraging you, brothers and sisters, to think about your position here in Ukraine as a stewardship. God has entrusted you with a very unique challenge and opportunity. And a big part of that challenge and opportunity is trauma. Either seeing it for yourself or interacting with those who have been very deeply affected. I want to encourage you that you can do it well. And you don't have to burn out, and you don't have to go through compassion fatigue. Now, if you are, there's no shame in that, okay? It's okay. It's all right. You're human. Things happen to people. Sometimes even strong people get heat exhaustion. It's okay. One of the things I want to encourage you with is for you to remember that you are responsible to people, but you are not responsible for people. John Maxwell makes that distinction. And I like how Lipsky talks about stewardship here because it is emphasizing the responsibility to people. And when I realize that I'm responsible to people, that helps me to see an end point. If I'm responsible for someone, it never stops. Okay? If so-and-so goes out and falls off the wagon, I got to go help them again and again and again. But in the end, the only person I can be responsible for is me. Because I can't choose for anybody else. I can't force a response from anybody. I can only respond myself. So I'm responsible to and for myself, but I am only responsible to everyone else. I hope that lifts a bit of a weight and provides a helpful distinction for you. So how do we come back from compassion fatigue, or how do we deter it from happening in the first place? Before we dive into some of the small practices that we can do to deter this, I'd like to offer you a caution that comes from Brother Norm Miller. His challenge was not to use compassion fatigue as a weapon. In other words, don't use it as simply just slapping labels on people. And on the other hand, don't use it as a crutch or as an escape to simply not do what you know you could do, to be lazy, to simply give up or just let things slide that indeed you could do something about. And so it's good to be aware of both sides of the road, the ditch on each side. Can you recover from compassion fatigue? Absolutely. Norm said he himself has come back. He talked about a period in his work as director where he recognized that he was just becoming cynical. He felt like whatever he did didn't matter. It wasn't going anywhere. Nobody cared. Nothing of eternal value was happening. And God brought him back from that. He found that God gave him healing and recovery from compassion fatigue. So I want to encourage you with that. I'm encouraging you to think about your link with Jesus. There was a British preacher in the late 1800s, early 1900s, J.H. Jowett. He said, "My brethren, I do not know how any Christian service is to be fruitful if the servant is not primarily baptized in the spirit of a suffering compassion. We can never heal the needs we do not feel. Tearless hearts can never be the heralds of the passion. We must pity if we would redeem. We must bleed if we would be the ministers of the saving blood. We must perfect by our passion the passion of the Lord, and by our own suffering sympathies we must fill up that which is behind in the sufferings of Christ. Put on, therefore, as God's elect, a heart of compassion." What I'm saying is, guard your connection with Christ, and in turn guard your emotions so that you have something to give emotionally in those times of need. Again, from my discussion with Norm, he recommended the book Jesus Centered. It's actually not in your resources, but his synopsis of what stuck out to him from the book was, "I might be surrounded by needy people and be running myself ragged and trying to minister to them. However, if all the needy people come between me and Jesus, then I'm not following Jesus, I'm following the needy people. Focus on what Jesus wants, not on what all the people around you want." So what are some practices that we can engage in? I'm not here to talk about big interventions or high-priced counselors. There may be a place for all of those. Retreats, counseling, things like that. I think they do have their place. You'll find them listed on your resources handout. I'd like to list just a few don'ts, and then we'll get into my favorite part, the do's, what to do. Don't blame others, and I don't think I have this on a slide. Don't look for a new job, buy a new car, get a divorce, or have an affair. Okay? Don't fall into the habit of complaining with your colleagues. Don't work harder and longer. Don't self-medicate. Now, I must confess that being the good Anabaptist that I am, in parentheses of don't self-medicate, I have the word with exclamation point and question mark, coffee? Nothing pointed. I love coffee, by the way. Don't neglect your own needs and interests. All right, what are some things we can do? There is an app called the Pause app. How many are familiar with the Pause app? Anybody? Okay. Anybody familiar with John Eldridge? Okay, one or two. He has an app called the Pause app, and I'll give you two views of the webpage there. On the webpage it says, "This app invites you into the simple practice of releasing everything to God, restoring your union with God, and inviting Him to fill you." And what he has on this app are recorded 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute, and 10-minute prayers that you can choose. And you can set up a reminder once or twice a day to remind you that it's time to take a pause. In the world that is going and going and going, a 1 minute pause, or 3 or 5 or 10, can be very healing and fulfilling for the soul. And especially in the American culture that my wife and I live in, it's really vital. I don't know what you face here. So I'm offering that to you. It's not on your, I did not put that on your resource list, but it should be there. I've used it for several months now. I've not used it here necessarily, but on my way home from work, different times, I will just listen to a 3-minute prayer, pray along with, just give everything to God, ask Him to fill me, restore my union with Him. It's just a wonderful thing. All right. What are some things we can do? I really recommend this book here, Get Your Life Back by John Eldredge, Everyday Practices for a World Gone Mad. He talks about union in that book. And I really like that as being the most important thing in life. We need to stay connected to God. That's what Jesus was praying for, that we would be one as he was one with the Father, all together in unity. But things happen in life. It's not just crying babies and bad children. It's, needy people and the constant knocking at the door and the phone calls and the WhatsApp messages that can draw us away from that union with Christ. And so I'm encouraging you to think about, and even just disappointments. Things didn't turn out the way I hoped, and so now there's a little gap between me and God. And somehow we're just not as close as we once were. So union is so vital to deter compassion fatigue. Another thing that is so important is beauty. Beauty. And somebody else talked about the 1 minute smile. And you don't have to even be in a beautiful place. You can think about something beautiful. And their suggestion was just to close your eyes and think about that beautiful place and smile. Again, this is something that I got from John Eldredge. He said, beauty reassures us that goodness is still real in the world, more real than harm or scarcity or evil. So I'm going to show you a picture here. I took that on Monday on our way here. Just tremendous. I also took that one. I'm sure you have in your mind what a beautiful place is like. A sunset, a sunrise, something that you remember from your past. What's so great about God's weapons is that while they often look passive, they're actually very powerful. They're very powerful. And I've just got to read this excerpt from what Eldredge says. He said, God filled the world with a renewable supply of something our souls need daily. Beauty. Yes, beauty. The fact that our world is so saturated with beauty, breathtaking in so many ways, great and small, this ought to let you know that God feels it's something you need for your survival. We're absolutely swimming in it. Heaven always heals. Beauty heals, partly because it proclaims that there is goodness in the world and that goodness prevails or is preserved or will somehow outlast all harm and darkness. The moment of perceiving something beautiful confers on the perceiver the gift of life. Beauty reassures us that goodness is still real in the world, more real than harm or scarcity or evil, more real than whatever is happening on the front lines. Beauty reassures us of abundance, especially that God is absolutely abundant in goodness and in life. Beauty reassures us there is plenty of life to be had. I believe beauty reassures us that the end of this story is wonderful. The power of beauty. And we don't even have to be in a beautiful place. We can be in a very chaotic place, but if we take a moment to think about the beauty of something that we have seen, and to turn our hearts to God, just as beauty is designed to do. It's designed to turn us to Him. What a blessing and a filling for our souls. Beauty. Talk with others. Be willing to talk about the things that you are facing. Now, Heather and I are not animal people, so this next one will be a little humorous perhaps, but get a pet or pet a pet. Okay? It has been shown in studies that interacting with an animal, a friendly one of course, maybe even Chico, does so much for lowering blood pressure and putting one's mind at ease. There's just something very beautiful and helpful. Pets accept whatever affection you're able to give them without asking for more. They're basically invulnerable, as somebody has said, to provider burnout. Have you ever found a dog that was burned out? No, they just go and go, don't they? And you can ignore them for a couple days and come back, and they're just still your best friend. You know, it's just tremendous. God gave us that gift. Understand that your feelings are normal. It's okay. Okay, it's all right to burn out or to have compassion fatigue. It wasn't something you intended to do. You didn't do it on purpose. Sometimes these things just happen. Consider gratitude. One of the things I've done several times in the last several months is just take a walk in the morning, one of the first things, and just thank God. Not do any requests, not do any, but just thank Him for different things that I see or things that I think about or how great He is. Gratitude has a way of filling us up, and just like beauty, it's a passive thing in many ways, but it's powerful. It does so much for us, for our soul. Eat properly. I know, so basic. Exercise. Sleep. Take some time off. Go to a cafe. Get a latte. Get some honey cake. Don't be afraid to do something that is fulfilling. Engage in an absorbing interest. Alden likes to paint. And Brother Ed and Sister Leah like to take an evening walk. I'm assuming you find that fulfilling somehow. Maybe even milking the cow is fulfilling. I don't know. I am not an animal care person, and the day I found that out was a beautiful day for me. But but something that you can lose yourself in, because when you're engaged in constant interaction, it depletes you. And so if you can find, if puzzles are your thing, if reading is your thing, whatever it is, an absorbing interest that you look up and you realize an hour went by. Wow, I just really enjoyed that hour. God gave us the world to enjoy. And then a final one, take 3 deep breaths. And that may sound kind of funny. Actually, in the Pause app, John Eldredge starts out most of his prayers by encouraging 3 deep breaths before he even moves into the prayer. Part of that is when we get so uptight and focused on life, sometimes we forget to breathe deeply. So we're going to do it right now, okay? Let's do 3 deep breaths, okay? In, out. In, out. In, out. Do you feel any sense of release? Or, maybe you're about to go to sleep, but this is not yoga, okay? It's not meditation. This is how God has designed our bodies. We function well when we get enough air. And it even helps our brains and clears our minds in many times. So just having that little practice and being aware of how things are going in your life. In closing, I am so grateful for the work that your staff are doing here in Ukraine. I admire your work on the front lines of the kingdom. And I hope that this talk has given you more ammunition for battle. You are heroes, but please remember that you are human. God loves you, and your brothers and sisters in Christ are praying for you. We are supporting you, and we thank you for your kingdom contribution.